My stepmother stole my father's inheritance. Now she wants to throw me out of the house I grew up in. I'm a 29-year-old man, and until my father died last year, I thought I had at least one unshakable constant in my life: the house I grew up in. It wasn't just a house, it was home. A modest two-story place with creaky wooden floors, walls lined with family photos, and a backyard where I learned to ride a bike. My father used to say, "This house will always be yours. No matter what happens, you'll always have a roof over your head." But he didn't anticipate what would happen after he remarried. When my mother died of cancer, when I was 15, my dad was broken. For years, he refused to even date again. Then, when I was in my early 20s, he met Linda. She was younger than him by nearly 15 years, polished, always dressed like she was going to a dinner party. At first, I wanted to be happy for him. He deserved companionship, but something about her never felt right. She was too calculating, too controlling. She started with little things, like moving my mom's photos into storage, saying it was too painful for dad to look at them. Then she pushed him to sell his old car, because it was a waste of money. And slowly, she positioned herself as the decision maker in everything. Still, dad loved her, and he kept assuring me she was good for him. I bit my tongue, even when it felt like she was slowly erasing every trace of the life we had before she arrived. When dad got sick 2 years ago, heart problems, in and out of the hospital, Linda was suddenly everywhere. She handled his medications, his appointments, his finances. She became his gatekeeper, controlling who saw him and when. I trusted her at first, but as his health declined, I noticed how distant he became from me. Phone calls went unanswered. Visits were cut short. When I confronted her, she smiled that tight, patronizing smile, and said, "He needs rest. Don't burden him with your problems." When dad finally passed, I was devastated. I sat in that house, surrounded by memories, and tried to convince myself that at least I still had this place. The one thing he promised would always be mine. But then came the will reading. I sat there in the lawyer's office, bracing myself for grief all over again, when the words cut me like knives. The house my father promised me, the one I grew up in, had been left entirely to Linda. Not shared, not split, hers. I couldn't believe it. I demanded to see the will myself. And there it was, clear as day, his signature at the bottom of a document that handed everything, house, savings, even his pension, to her. I was left with nothing, not a single cent. I remember staring at the paper, my vision swimming, my throat closing. How could my father, the man who raised me alone after mom died, leave me with nothing? Linda put her hand on mine, feigning sympathy. "I know this is hard for you, but your father trusted me to take care of things. You'll be fine. You're young. You'll figure it out." I wanted to scream at her, to accuse her of manipulating him when he was sick, but I was too stunned to speak. A week later, she called me into the kitchen. She didn't bother sugarcoating it this time. "You need to start making plans," she said. "This house is mine now. I'll give you a month to move out." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "Move out? This is my home. Dad wanted me to have this place." She shrugged. "Your dad wanted a lot of things, but the will is the will, and legally, you have no claim. So unless you want to take me to court and waste money you don't have, you'll pack your bags." In that moment, standing in the kitchen where my mom used to bake cookies, where my dad used to tell me stories before bed, I realized my stepmother wasn't just taking the house. She was erasing me from my own family, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to fight her. I spent the next few days wandering around the house like a ghost. Every corner was loaded with memories. My dad teaching me how to shave in the upstairs bathroom, my mom's laughter echoing from the kitchen before she got sick, the scratches on the doorframe where dad had marked my height year after year. And now, all of it was being ripped away by a woman who had only been in our lives for a few years. I kept replaying that day in the lawyer's office. The will, with my father's signature neatly at the bottom. His decision to leave everything to Linda. It didn't make sense, not just emotionally, but logically. My dad had always told me the house was mine. He said it openly, repeatedly. I wasn't some spoiled kid expecting a handout. I was holding on to a promise. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My father was a simple man. He hated paperwork, hated lawyers, hated anything formal. When mom died, it took him years just to get around to updating his insurance policy. And suddenly, out of nowhere, he'd not only updated his will but completely rewritten it to cut me out entirely. It felt wrong, too neat, too convenient. I started digging. The lawyer who read the will was someone I'd never met before. Dad had always used a different local lawyer for taxes and other small things, but this man was new. When I asked around, I learned that Linda had arranged everything. She'd been the one who contacted him, who handled all the paperwork, When Dad was sick. That's when the first seed of suspicion took root. Maybe Dad hadn't signed that will at all. I pulled out an old birthday card Dad had written me the year before. His handwriting was familiar to me, slanted, a little shaky but distinctive. I compared it to the will, and while it looked close, something about it felt off. The letters were too clean, the strokes too steady for a man who had been on heavy medication at the time. I couldn't shake the thought. What if Linda had forged it? The idea sounded insane, like something out of a bad movie. But the more I looked, the more I convinced myself it was possible. She had control over his medications, his appointments, his entire life during his last months. It wouldn't have been hard for her to slip papers in front of him, or worse, sign them herself when he was too weak to fight back. I knew I needed answers. So I started calling people, Dad's old friends, neighbors, anyone who might have noticed something during his final months. That's when I spoke to Mr. Harris, our next-door neighbor. I don't want to stir up trouble, he said hesitantly, but I saw some strange things before your dad passed. Linda would keep visitors short, cut conversations off. Once, I heard your dad shouting something about not changing anything. She slammed the door before I could hear more. My chest tightened. It felt like confirmation of what I'd been suspecting. When I pressed him for more, Mr. Harris added, your dad told me once, not long before he passed, that the house was yours. He said, no matter what Linda says, this place goes to my son. That's the last real conversation we had. Those words hit me like a hammer. If he said that to Harris, then the will in Linda's hands couldn't be right. Fueled by anger, I confronted Linda that night. She was sitting in the living room sipping wine when I walked in, my father's old birthday card in one hand, a copy of the will in the other. You forged it, didn't you? I demanded. Dad would never cut me out like that. His handwriting doesn't even match. She didn't flinch. She just smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. Careful, she said. Accusing someone of forgery is a serious crime. That's exactly what you did. I spat. You manipulated him when he was sick, or worse, you signed it yourself. She set her glass down and leaned forward, her eyes cold. Your father trusted me. I took care of him when you were too busy, living your own life. Maybe he realized you didn't deserve this house. The words stung, but I saw through them. She was deflecting, trying to make me doubt myself. I'm going to prove it, I said, my voice shaking but steady. I'll take this will to a handwriting expert. I'll drag your name through court if I have to. You won't get away with this. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. Do that, she said calmly. But remember, lawyers cost money. Money you don't have. And while you're busy wasting what little you do, you'll still be packing your things. Because whether you like it or not, this house is mine now. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. I stormed out of the room, fists clenched, heart racing. For the first time, I realized just how dangerous she was. She wasn't just greedy. She was calculated. And if I wanted to fight her, I'd have to be just as ruthless. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, one thought burned in my mind. She thought she had won, but she had no idea what I was willing to do to protect the only piece of my father I had left. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Linda thought I was weak. She thought I'd roll over, accept her lies, and disappear quietly. But she underestimated me. She underestimated how far I'd go to protect my father's memory, and the house that held every piece of him. The first thing I did was contact a handwriting expert. I scraped together what little savings I had and scheduled a consultation. I brought copies of my dad's old letters, cards, even a journal he had kept when my mom was sick. When the expert looked at the will, he frowned almost immediately. See here, he said, pointing at the signature. Your father's writing slants inconsistently. It's smoother, too clean, almost like someone was copying it carefully. My pulse quickened. So you think it's forged? He leaned back. I can't say definitively without a full forensic test, but if you want my professional opinion, yes. This doesn't look natural. It looks rehearsed. I felt both vindicated and enraged. Linda had forged the will. She'd stolen my inheritance with a pen and paper. But having suspicions wasn't enough. I needed undeniable proof. I went back to the lawyer who had handled the will. He was evasive, avoiding eye contact, brushing off my questions. Your stepmother handled everything, he said. I was just doing my job. Did you witness him sign it? I pressed. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But I caught it. Of course, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. I left his office seething. He was covering for her. Maybe he owed her a favor. Maybe she paid him off. Either way, it stank. That night, I started combing through my dad's old documents. Linda had boxed up most of his things, shoving them into the attic. But I still had access. I opened box after box until I found what I was looking for, my father's personal journal. The last entry was dated just weeks before his death. His handwriting was messy, shaky, but the words were clear. Linda keeps pushing me to change the will. I told her no. This house belongs to my son. It always will. She got angry. I don't know what to do anymore. My hands shook as I read it. Tears blurred my vision. There it was, proof in his own words that he never wanted to change the will. Proof that Linda had manipulated everything after he passed. I took photos of the entry, backing them up immediately. But as I dug deeper, I found something even darker. Hidden at the bottom of the box was an envelope addressed to me. My father had written my name on it, but it had never been given to me. The seal was broken. Inside was a letter, but parts of it were torn, ripped out violently, as if someone had tried to destroy it. The fragments that remained chilled me. Don't trust Linda. She is not what she seems. If something happens to me, know that I tried to protect you. The house is yours, no matter what she says. My chest tightened. My father had tried to warn me, and Linda had intercepted it. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I went to confront her, clutching the journal and letter in my hands. She was in the living room, sipping wine as usual. You forged his will, I said, throwing the journal onto the table. He wrote about it. He said this house was mine. He warned me about you. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes widened. Her lips tightened. But then, just as quickly, she composed herself. You think anyone will believe a scribble in an old journal? You think a torn letter will hold up in court? Please. All I have to do is say your father was confused, that his illness made him paranoid. Who do you think they'll believe? The grieving widow or the bitter son, who can't let go? Her words sliced through me, but I didn't back down. I'll find proof. Real proof. And when I do, you'll regret ever thinking you could erase me. She leaned back, smiling coldly. Careful. Digging too deep might bury you instead. I stormed out, my heart pounding. That night, as I sat in my room staring at the journal, I realized something terrifying. If she was willing to forge documents, intercept letters, and rewrite my father's legacy, what else was she capable of? And then another thought hit me, one that made my blood run cold. What if my father's death hadn't been natural at all? That thought, that maybe my father's death wasn't natural, kept me awake all night. My mind replayed every detail of his last weeks. The way Linda hovered over him constantly, the way she managed his medication so possessively, how she cut visits short, how she snapped at me whenever I tried to help. Back then, I told myself she was just stressed. Now, I wasn't so sure. The official cause of death was heart failure. He'd been battling heart problems for years, so it seemed plausible. But what if someone pushed him over the edge? What if the same woman, who stole his house, his inheritance, and his legacy had also taken his life? I needed answers. The first place I went was the hospital. I tracked down one of the nurses, who had taken care of my dad in his final weeks. Her name was Carol. A kind woman with tired eyes, who remembered me right away when I cautiously asked if anything seemed unusual about his care. Her face tightened. Unusual how? She asked carefully. Unusual like maybe someone interfering with his medication, I said. She hesitated before speaking. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but your stepmother was very controlling. Too controlling. She insisted on giving him his pills herself, even when we offered to do it. And she refused to let us adjust his doses. Even though his doctor recommended changes near the end, she always said, he trusts me, leave it to me. We thought it was odd, but families grieve in strange ways. We didn't want to push too hard. Her words made my blood run cold. When I asked if there was a toxicology report, she shook her head. Not for a heart failure case, unless the family requests it. And she signed off immediately on declining one. Signed off. Of course she had. I left the hospital shaking. My suspicions weren't just paranoia anymore. There was a real chance Linda had manipulated his treatment, maybe even poisoned him slowly. Back at the house, I started going through Dad's old medications. Most of the bottles were gone, but I found one half-empty container, shoved in the back of a drawer. The label was for a heart medication, but when I Googled the pills inside, I discovered they weren't the same. My stomach dropped. They were a higher dose. One that could be fatal for someone with his condition if taken too frequently. And Linda had been the one controlling every dose. I needed more evidence. I called the pharmacy listed on the bottle and asked about the prescription. The pharmacist confirmed something shocking. The prescription had been picked up by Linda, not my father. And the refill dates didn't match the dosage schedule. She was getting more than he should have been taking. It hit me like a freight train. My father didn't just die from heart failure. Linda might have helped him along, fueled by rage and dread. I confronted her that evening. She was in the living room again, sipping wine like always, flipping through a glossy magazine. I slammed the pill bottle down on the table. These aren't Dad's pills, I snapped. They're a higher dose. And you were the one refilling them. You killed him, didn't you? She glanced at the bottle, then back at me, her face unreadable. "Careful," she said softly. "That's a dangerous accusation. You controlled everything, his food, his meds, his appointments. You made sure no one else could help. And you signed off on skipping the autopsy. You murdered him so you could take everything." For the first time, her mask cracked. Her smile twisted into something cruel, her eyes sharp as knives. "And what exactly are you going to do about it? March into a police station with half a pill bottle, and a story about how you just know. Do you think anyone will believe you over me? I was the grieving wife. You were the absent son, who never appreciated his father until it was too late." I clenched my fists, shaking with fury. "I'll find proof. Real proof. And when I do, you won't just lose the house, you'll lose everything." She leaned in close, her breath hot with wine. "Be careful, boy. If you keep digging, you might end up in the ground next to him." Her words sent chills down my spine, but they also lit a fire in me. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the truth of how he died. Linda thought she could scare me into silence. She thought her threats would break me, but she was wrong. I was going to expose her, even if it killed me. After Linda's threat, I barely slept. I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling, hearing her words over and over. "If you keep digging, you might end up in the ground next to him." I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for the house or even my father's will. I was fighting for my life. Linda was dangerous, and she knew I was close to exposing her. I had to move carefully. The next morning, I began building a case. Not just suspicions, not just half-proofs, evidence. Something so undeniable that even Linda's manipulations couldn't bury it. First, I went back to the pharmacy. I asked for a full record of my father's prescriptions over the last year. The pharmacist hesitated, but when I explained that I was his son, and that there might have been foul play, she agreed to print them out. The papers told a chilling story. Linda had been refilling medications far more frequently than necessary, and often picking up drugs that weren't even prescribed to him. One entry stood out: a medication meant to increase blood pressure. For a man with severe heart problems, that was practically poison. I left the pharmacy shaking, clutching the papers like they were dynamite. Next, I visited my father's doctor. He was an older man, Dr. Patel, who had known my father for years. When I asked about my father's treatment near the end, he looked uneasy. "I wanted to change his dosage," he admitted. "His condition was worsening, and I suggested adjustments. But Linda refused. She said your father didn't want to change anything, that he trusted her judgment." I found it odd. But she was his wife. "Did you ever hear him say that himself?" I pressed. Dr. Patel frowned. "No. She always spoke for him, and when I insisted on speaking to him directly, she said he was too tired." I regret not pushing harder. I left his office with rage burning in my chest. Piece by piece, it was becoming clear. Linda hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd orchestrated my father's death. But I needed more. I needed to know why. I started digging into her finances. I managed to get into some of my father's old records, bank statements, insurance papers. That's when I saw it, months before his death. My father's life insurance policy had been changed. Originally, I was listed as the primary beneficiary, but shortly after he got sick, the policy was rewritten. Linda became the sole beneficiary, and the signature authorizing it. The same shaky, suspicious handwriting I'd seen on the will. I felt sick. It was all planned. From the moment my father's health started declining, Linda had been setting the stage, cutting me out of everything, isolating him, taking control of his finances, rewriting legal documents. And when he became too weak to resist, she finished the job. I needed someone else to confirm it, someone who had seen more than she realized. So I went back to our neighbor, Mr. Harris. When I told him what I'd found, his face went pale. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "Your dad told me once that he didn't trust her with his pills. He said she kept insisting he take more than the doctor recommended. He even joked that she was trying to kill him." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice cracking. He looked down, ashamed. I thought he was exaggerating, or maybe just confused. I never thought. His voice trailed off, but his words confirmed what I already knew. My father hadn't been confused. He'd known, and he'd tried to warn me, through his journal, through the torn letter Linda had intercepted. By now, I had a stack of evidence: suspicious prescriptions, financial records, a doctor's testimony, a neighbor's statement. It wasn't enough for a conviction yet, but it was enough to raise serious questions. I started drafting a file, organizing everything. I planned to take it to the police within the week. But that night, something happened that made my blood run cold. I came home to find my room ransacked. My drawers pulled out, my papers scattered, my laptop missing. Only one person could have done it. I stormed downstairs, and there she was, Linda, calmly sipping her wine in the living room like always. You went through my things, I growled. She smiled sweetly. What things? You don't own anything here. Remember, this is my house now. Where's my laptop? I demanded. She shrugged. Maybe you misplaced it. Stress does funny things to the mind. I clenched my fists, trembling with rage. She had stolen my evidence. She knew exactly what I was planning, and she was one step ahead. Then she leaned forward, her eyes cold and sharp. Listen carefully. You can't win. The more you dig, the more you'll lose. Your father is gone, and this house is mine. If you don't stop, I'll make sure you end up with nothing. Not even your name. Her words chilled me more than the threat of death. Because she wasn't just trying to erase me from the house. She wanted to erase me from existence, the same way she had erased my father. That night, I sat in the dark, my heart pounding, realizing I was running out of time. If I didn't act soon, she'd bury the truth forever. But I couldn't shake one terrifying thought. What if she already had someone on the inside? The lawyer, the doctor, even the police. What if the moment I went to them, I was signing my own death sentence? I barely slept after finding my room torn apart. Every creak in the house made me flinch. I kept imagining Linda standing outside my door, glass of wine in one hand, poison in the other, waiting for the right moment to finish what she had started with my father. By morning, my fear had hardened into resolve. I couldn't wait any longer. If she was already stealing evidence from me, then she knew I was close. I had to strike first. The problem was, I couldn't trust the usual channels. If the lawyer had been complicit, if the doctor had been silenced, if the police brushed me off, I'd be finished. Worse, Linda could spin it back on me, make me look paranoid, unstable, maybe even dangerous. She'd already tried planting that narrative with the neighbors. So I decided to take a different approach, create a trail she couldn't erase. I scanned every document I had left, my father's journal, the torn letter, the pharmacy receipts, Mr. Harris' statement. Then I sent everything to 3 trusted friends, people outside the family, people Linda had no reach over. I gave them instructions. If anything happens to me, release this to the press. It wasn't enough to win in court yet, but it was enough to ruin her reputation. Once I knew my backup was safe, I planned my next move. I needed more proof, something undeniable, something so heavy even Linda's influence couldn't bury it. And that meant digging into my father's medical records. I went back to the hospital and met with Carol, the nurse who had warned me before. I begged her for help. Please, I said. If my stepmother tampered with his medication, there has to be a record, dosages, times, who administered what. I need those files. She looked around nervously, then leaned in. You didn't hear this from me. But there were discrepancies. Pills going missing, doses logged that didn't match what he should have been taking. Some of us suspected, but when we raised questions, Linda shut it down. She told us he'd switched medications at another clinic, but the paperwork never lined up. Can you get me copies? I asked, desperation in my voice. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll try. But if they catch me, I could lose my job. A few days later, she slipped me a manila envelope in the parking lot. Inside were photocopies of my father's charts. And just like she'd said, the records didn't add up. Some dosages were doubled, others skipped entirely. And every time something suspicious happened, Linda's name appeared in the notes, medication administered by wife. It was the smoking gun. But I knew I couldn't sit on it. If Linda suspected I had these files, she'd stop at nothing to destroy them, or me. That night, I confronted her again. I wanted to see her reaction, to confirm I was right. She was in the living room, as always, sipping wine, and pretending she owned the world. I threw the envelope on the table. Her smile faltered for the first time. You poisoned him, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You manipulated his treatment, overdosed him, and then covered it up. And I can prove it. For a moment, she just stared at me, her jaw tight, her eyes cold. Then, slowly, she smiled again. And what will you do with that proof? Go to the police. The same police who know me as the grieving widow. Or maybe the lawyer who handled everything for me. You think you're the first person to try to stand in my way. You killed him, I repeated, louder this time. You stole his house, his money, his life. And you think you'll get away with it. But you won't. Her eyes narrowed. She stood up, walked closer, and whispered in my ear, if you push me, I'll bury you with him. And no one will ever know the truth. My body went cold. For a second, I thought she might actually kill me right then. I locked myself in my room that night, clutching the envelope, every nerve in my body screaming with fear. But instead of backing down, the fear solidified into rage. The next day, I booked an appointment with a journalist, an investigative reporter I'd found online who specialized in corruption and abuse cases. I sent him copies of the documents, along with the journal entry and the letter. When we met, I spilled everything, the forged will, the manipulated medications, the threats. He listened carefully, then said, "If what you're saying is true, this is explosive, but I'll need more. Witnesses, bank records, anything that shows a pattern." I nodded. "I'll get you whatever you need." That night, when I came back to the house, I found Linda waiting at the kitchen table. Her face was calm, but her eyes were blazing. "I know what you've been doing," she said softly. "Talking to people, spreading lies. Do you really think you're strong enough to beat me?" I stared at her, my chest tight, my fists clenched. "I don't have to beat you," I said. "The truth will." She leaned back, smirking, and said the words that still haunt me, "Truth doesn't matter. Power does. And I have all of it. You're just a boy playing detective in a game you can't win." Her confidence chilled me, but she was wrong. Because for the first time, I wasn't alone. I had people on the outside. I had evidence she couldn't erase. And no matter how much power she thought she had, I wasn't going to stop until everyone knew what she'd done, even if it cost me everything. Working with the journalist, Daniel, was the first time in months that I felt like I wasn't screaming into a void. For once, someone listened without dismissing me as paranoid, without painting me as the bitter son. He took notes meticulously, recorded our conversations, and asked the right questions. "This isn't just a family squabble," he said one night after we'd spent hours going through documents in a dingy diner booth. "This is fraud. Potential homicide. If your evidence holds, your stepmother isn't just greedy, she's dangerous." Dangerous? The word settled like ice in my chest. I already knew it, but hearing someone else say it gave it weight. Daniel's plan was simple: gather enough to publish and expose. Not just whispers or accusations, but a timeline, a chain of evidence so clear no one could deny it. "We don't just take her down in court," he said. "We take her down in the court of public opinion first. Once this is out, police won't be able to ignore it." I agreed. I had nothing left to lose. We spent days piecing it all together. My father's journal, the torn letter, the pharmacy records showing Linda picked up medications he was never prescribed, testimony from the nurse, Carol, the financial records proving she changed the insurance to make herself the sole beneficiary. The picture was clear. Linda had isolated my father, manipulated his medication, likely accelerated his death, and stolen everything through forged documents. But Linda must have sensed something was coming. The retaliation began quietly. First, my bank account was suddenly frozen for suspicious activity. When I called, the bank said they'd received a report of fraudulent transactions I hadn't made. Then, at work, I was pulled into HR. Someone had sent an anonymous tip accusing me of harassment. It was baseless, but the damage was done. My boss looked at me differently, and I knew my job was hanging by a thread. And then it escalated. One night, I came back to the house and found the back door wide open. My stomach dropped. Inside, drawers were pulled out, papers scattered, furniture overturned. My father's journal, gone. The torn letter, gone. Every physical piece of evidence I had left inside the house had vanished. I ran to my room. The envelope Carol had given me with the medical records, also gone. She had taken everything. I collapsed on the floor, my chest heaving. Months of digging, of holding on to every scrap of my father's truth, gone in one night. But then I remembered. I had scanned everything. Daniel had copies. My friends had backups. Linda hadn't destroyed the evidence. She had only confirmed how desperate she was to erase it. The next morning, Daniel called me. His voice was tense. "We need to move fast. She knows we're closing in. I'm pushing my editor to publish by the end of the week." I agreed. But I knew what that meant. Linda would strike again. And she did. 2 days later, as I was leaving Daniel's office, a car swerved toward me at an intersection. Tires screeched. I jumped back just in time as the car sped past. The driver's face was obscured, but I didn't need to see it to know who was behind it. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop, or next time, you won't get back up." I showed it to Daniel, my hands shaking. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "This proves we're right. People don't try to kill you if you're lying." We doubled down. Daniel started reaching out to more witnesses. Carol agreed to go on record. Mr. Harris, the neighbor, reluctantly agreed to share what he'd overheard. Even Dr. Patel, my father's doctor, admitted he'd been pressured by Linda and regretted not speaking up sooner. The story was ready. The night before publication, I sat in my childhood bedroom one last time, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. My father's voice echoed in my head. "This house will always be yours." I whispered into the empty room, "I'm trying, Dad. I'm trying to keep your promise alive." The next morning, the article went live. The headline hit like a bomb. "Stepmother accused of forging will, inheriting fortune, and poisoning husband. Family demands justice." The story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Neighbors, coworkers, even distant relatives flooded my phone with messages, shock, anger, support. For the first time, people saw Linda not as the grieving widow, but as the monster she really was. And Linda, she lost her mask. That evening, she stormed into the house, her face twisted with rage. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think an article will save you? I'll destroy you for this." I stood my ground. "No, Linda, you've already destroyed yourself." But even as I said it, I felt a chill crawl down my spine, because I knew she wasn't done. She had nothing left to lose either. And when a person like Linda is cornered, that's when they're the most dangerous. The morning the article went live, I thought I would finally feel relief. Instead, all I felt was dread. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications, messages, calls, friends, colleagues, strangers, half of them offering support, the other half prying for gossip. The article had gone viral. Linda's name was plastered everywhere. Black widow, inheritance thief, poisoner. And she knew exactly who had put it there. That night, I heard her before I saw her. The sharp clack of her heels against the hardwood, echoing through the house like gunshots. I was in the kitchen, clutching a glass of water, when she appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale with fury, her eyes bloodshot, her hands shaking with barely contained rage. "You ruined me," she hissed. "Everything I built, everything I worked for. You've destroyed it." I set the glass down, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You destroyed it yourself, Linda. You killed him. You stole from me. You lied. The truth was always going to come out." She let out a sharp laugh, almost manic. "Truth? You really think anyone cares about truth? I was the perfect wife, the grieving widow. I had everyone eating out of my hand. And then you." She jabbed a finger at me. "You threw it all away because you couldn't handle being cut out. Because you're weak. Because you couldn't accept that your father loved me more than he ever loved you." Her words sliced through me, but I held my ground. "He loved me enough to promise me this house. He loved me enough to try and warn me about you. And you." My voice shook now. "You loved his money more than you ever loved him." Something in her snapped. She lunged at me, knocking the glass off the counter. It shattered across the floor as she shoved me hard against the wall. Her face was inches from mine, her breath hot and sharp with wine. "You don't deserve anything," she spat. "Not his house, not his money, not his name. I should have gotten rid of you along with him." Her hands were around my throat before I even processed what was happening. She squeezed, her nails digging into my skin, her eyes wild. Panic surged through me. I clawed at her wrists, gasping for air. My vision blurred, dark spots dancing in front of my eyes. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might actually finish me. Then, through the haze, I heard voices shouting, "Police! Drop it now!" Red and blue lights flashed through the window. 2 officers burst into the kitchen, pulling Linda off me and pinning her against the counter. She thrashed, screaming obscenities, spitting like a feral animal. I collapsed to the floor, coughing, clutching my throat. One of the officers helped me up. "Are you okay?" I nodded weakly, though my body shook uncontrollably. How did you know?" Daniel stepped into the doorway, his face grim. "I called them. After the article went live, I knew she'd come for you. I couldn't let you face her alone." They hauled Linda out of the house, her screams echoing through the night. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. You'll lose everything." And then she was gone. For the first time in months, the house was silent. In the weeks that followed, the case exploded. The article had already drawn national attention, and now Linda's arrest for attempted murder only fueled the fire. Investigators reopened my father's medical files, the pharmacy records, the doctor's testimony, Carol's statement. All of it came together. The suspicion of poisoning became an official investigation. People stopped seeing me as the bitter son. They started seeing me as the survivor. But even with Linda behind bars awaiting trial, I didn't feel like I had one. I sat in that house, my house, alone, surrounded by ghosts. My father's laughter, my mother's warmth, the promise he had made me, all of it stained by the nightmare Linda had brought into our lives. The lawyers told me I had a strong case to reclaim the inheritance, that the forged will wouldn't hold up. But even if I won the house legally, it didn't feel like a victory. Because the truth is, Linda had already taken the one thing I could never get back: time. Time with my father in his last months. Time I should have had to say goodbye properly, to care for him without her interference, to hear his voice one last time. She stole that from me, and no court could ever return it. Now, every night, I lie awake in the house I fought so hard to keep, and instead of feeling safe, I feel haunted. Haunted by the betrayal, by the violence, by the knowledge that my father's final moments were poisoned by the woman he trusted most. People call me brave. They say I should feel vindicated, but the truth is, I don't feel brave. I don't feel vindicated. I feel broken. And no matter what happens in court, no matter how much of the inheritance I recover, I know one thing with crushing certainty: I'll never be free of what she did. And I don't know how to live with that. Follow me for more stories.